You reach the salary you once thought would change everything. It doesn't, you double your savings. The relief lasts 3 weeks. You pay off debt, buy the home, secure the future, and still the feeling returns, not enough. This isn't about greed, it isn't about character. It's about how the brain calculates sufficiency. And the calculation, it turns out, has almost nothing to do with the numbers themselves. We treat enough money as if it were a destination. A threshold, cross it, and the anxiety stops. But the brain doesn't work in absolutes. It works in comparisons. It measures not what you have, but what you have relative to what you expected, what you had before, and what others around you possess. There is no objective enough encoded in human cognition. There is only the shifting sensation of sufficiency, a feeling generated by unconscious reference points that recalibrate faster than circumstances change. This is why the target moves, not because you're broken, but because the mechanism that determines the target was never designed to stay still. The brain habituates to new conditions with remarkable speed. A salary increase produces a brief elevation in satisfaction, then fades into baseline. The new income becomes normal. What once felt like abundance becomes the expected state. The emotional boost you anticipated doesn't compound, it evaporates. This operates subconsciously, you don't choose to adapt. The neural systems that process rewards simply recalibrate. What was once a peak becomes a plateau. The feeling of enough requires continuous escalation just to maintain the same emotional tone. Humans assess their position through comparison. As income or status rises, reference groups shift. You stop comparing yourself to where you were. You begin comparing yourself to peers in your new bracket. The finish line you crossed becomes irrelevant. What matters now is the distance between you and those slightly ahead. This is automatic. The brain selects comparison targets based on proximity and salience. Not fairness or logic. The surgeon compares herself to other surgeons. The entrepreneur compares himself to other entrepreneurs. Each cohort has its own distribution, and you will always find yourself somewhere in the middle or lower half of someone's range. The feeling of insufficiency isn't erased by wealth. It's relocated to a wealthier context. The prospect of losing what you have generates more psychological intensity than the prospect of gaining the same amount. Once a standard of living is established, the brain treats it as the minimum acceptable state. Falling below it feels catastrophic, even if that standard was recently an aspiration. This means financial security doesn't feel like achievement. It feels like vulnerability. The more you have, the more you have to lose. The fear of regression creates a constant background anxiety that no amount of surplus fully resolves. You're not protecting wealth. You're defending against an imagined future where it's gone. The brain dislikes ambiguity. It wants guarantees. But financial futures are probabilistic. Not certain. There is no amount of money that eliminates all risk. Medical crises, market crashes. Inflation, obsolescence, the variables are infinite. Sufficiency would require certainty. But certainty doesn't exist, so the brain compensates by inflating the safety margin. If you can't guarantee security at one level, perhaps you can at twice that level. Or 5 times. The threshold keeps rising because the underlying anxiety, uncertainty itself, cannot be resolved through accumulation. For many, self-worth becomes entangled with financial trajectory. Growth signals competence, stagnation signals decline. The need for enough conflicts with the need to feel that you are still advancing, still improving, still winning. This is especially true for individuals whose identity formed around achievement. Stopping feels like failure, even when the goal has been reached. The concept of enough implies an end to striving, and for those whose sense of self is built on striving, that end is psychologically intolerable. Each financial milestone resets the baseline. A raise doesn't make you feel richer for long. It makes your previous income feel inadequate in retrospect. Lifestyle expands to meet income. Expenses that once seemed extravagant become non-negotiable. The gap between income and a feeling of margin doesn't close. It stabilizes at a new altitude. This is not irrationality, it's adaptation. The brain is designed to normalize conditions and then seek improvement relative to the new normal. What felt like security at $50,000 doesn't feel like security at $150,000, because the entire framework of expectations has shifted. You're not chasing sufficiency. You're chasing the feeling you expected sufficiency to produce. And that feeling is always one level higher than wherever you currently stand. Those trained to forecast, plan, and model risk are more acutely aware of everything that could go wrong. They construct mental simulations of future scenarios, recessions, health crises, dependence needs, lifespan extension, inflation. Each variable adds to the perceived requirement for safety. Intelligence doesn't protect against this. It amplifies it. The more sophisticated your understanding of risk, the more reasons you generate to delay the conclusion that you have enough. Rational planning tools, spreadsheets, Monte Carlo simulations, retirement calculators become instruments of perpetual inadequacy. Every model shows a scenario where the current amount isn't sufficient. Education also increases comparison scope. You're aware of a wider range of lifestyles, opportunities, and status markers. The reference pool expands, the benchmarks multiply. Sufficiency becomes not just a matter of survival, but of optionality, legacy, and relative position within an increasingly global and visible hierarchy. Economies are organized around perpetual insufficiency. Salary structures ensure most people earn less than the next tier. Marketing industries exist to generate desire for what you don't yet have. Platforms and media constantly display curated evidence of others' abundance. Lifestyle inflation is not accidental. It's embedded in the logic of consumer markets. The economy requires you to want more, to spend more, to feel that your current state is incomplete. Financial sufficiency, if widely experienced, would destabilize growth models that depend on continuous consumption escalation. Workplace hierarchies reinforce the same dynamic. Titles, raises, and bonuses are structured as ladders with no terminal rung. Stagnation is framed as failure. Advancement is framed as expected. There is no culturally endorsed point at which it becomes acceptable to stop. The brain does not measure wealth. It measures change in wealth, relative position, and proximity to imagined disaster. These calculations regenerate the feeling of insufficiency regardless of absolute numbers. Most people will never feel they have enough money, not because they don't, but because enough is not a financial state. It's a psychological one, and the psychology recalibrates endlessly. This is not a problem to solve. It's a feature of how human minds navigate uncertainty and status in environments that never stop changing. The discomfort is not evidence of error. It's evidence of a system functioning exactly as it was shaped to function. You may one day have more money than you ever imagined, but the feeling you're seeking, lasting relief, permanent security, the quiet certainty that you can stop, was never in the money to begin with.